Reid.
And we're from Living Color.
We're from Living Color.
That's what he said. And we're watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa. News. Views. Frontline focus. In-depth analysis. Covering the coverage. Cultural features. This week, South Africa Now reports these stories. A bizarre new twist in the Winnie Mandela trial. A right-wing newspaper charges that it was the government, not the ANC, that kidnapped a key witness.
My paper, Patriot, got the information from a source in the intelligence services of the state.
We come a long way. Yes, we come a long way.
While efforts are underway to bring back thousands of political exiles, many South Africans are still fleeing the country and becoming new exiles. We have a unique film on the subject.
Many people would think that it is a contradiction. There could have been what you may have said, was euphoria. People thinking that, in the immediate future, we'll all be flocking back home. But the exact opposite of that is taking place.
And in our culture section, South Africa in America. A Philadelphia radio station is programming South African music, and it's drawing listeners.
I want to be able to present to people the most current news, the most current music. We just want them to really have a full understanding of what is happening today in today's South Africa.
All of these stories and more, but first, the uncensored news with Thandeka Gqubule and Fana Kekana.
Dumelang. The now postponed trial of Winnie Mandela is continuing to attract attention. Mrs. Mandela's supporters have now formed a committee to seek public support, while the press reports that Nelson Mandela has cancelled a long-delayed holiday so he may be present when the trial resumes. The Johannesburg Star reports that the 3 co-defendants who jumped bail before appearing in court with Mrs. Mandela have been located in Botswana. But the latest wrinkle appeared in a right-wing newspaper which charges that the government, which is prosecuting Mrs. Mandela, actually kidnapped the key witness to torpedo the trial. Phillip Tomlinson has this report.
The editor of Die Patriot, the newspaper seen as the mouthpiece of the Conservative Party, is in big trouble with the South African police after refusing to divulge his sources in a story which has created what is now a reversal of roles in the Winnie Mandela case. The article fingers the government of President F.W. de Klerk as a prime suspect in the kidnapping of a key witness, an embarrassing position first occupied by the African National Congress, who earlier denied it had a hand in sabotaging the now postponed trial. According to the report, it was in the government's interest to kidnap the witness, because the trial created an inconvenience for President F.W. de Klerk at a crucial stage of negotiations with the ANC. The South African Consulate in New York refused to grant us an interview, saying it would not comment on an ongoing trial. We also spoke by phone to Die Patriot editor Z.B. du Toit.
My paper, Patriot, got the information from a source in the intelligence services of the state. The General Secretary of the party, Mr. Andries Beyers, was the middleman, and he was subpoenaed to appear in court to divulge the source. He wouldn't do that, so he will again appear in court on the 12th of March.
The government is now also under attack from another group, the Winnie Mandela Ad Hoc Support Committee, People for Winnie Mandela, who are trying to win support for her case, which has so far caused criticism of the ANC. The committee charges the state with pretending to have the moral legitimacy to sit in judgment over people who have been victimized by apartheid. Meanwhile, as the ANC presses for a constituent assembly to form an interim government, Pretoria is resisting. And there is evidence that the United States has taken sides in the dispute. This, according to the American Committee on Africa's Mike Fleshman, who recently returned from South Africa.
While I was in South Africa, there was quite a high-ranking administration official in South Africa who had come essentially to read the riot act to the democratic movement about their continuing demand for constituent assembly, the ANC's call for an interim government to govern the country in the meantime, and also to voice U.S. opposition to the mass defiance campaign, which is now underway in South Africa.
A U.S. State Department spokesperson told us he was not aware of any official objection to a constituent assembly. For South Africa Now, this is Phillip Tomlinson.
The debate over sanctions is back in the news. How long should they remain and on what grounds should they be ended? SouthScan is reporting that the American government will ask Congress to lift some economic sanctions if Pretoria frees all political prisoners by April 30th. The ANC has asked that sanctions remain, although it has put forth a so-called linkage plan which asks foreign governments to ensure that Pretoria follows through in its reform plan. But now some prominent black South Africans who once supported sanctions want them lifted right away. Nadja Smith has this report.
At last December's ANC conference, the organization's leaders hinted that they were prepared to end their policy of calling for sanctions. But the rank and file rejected proposals to soften the organization's line. Now, Mark Mathabane, author of the bestseller Kaffir Boy, has editorialized to end sanctions, writing, "If sanctions are not lifted soon, South Africa may never begin, let alone accomplish, the daunting task of rebuilding its battered economy." At least one point of Mathabane's argument is uncontestable. The South African economy is suffering. Black unemployment is at an all-time high. At least one-third of the young people have never been in the workforce. But the ANC and its supporters overseas say there will be no political change in South Africa without continued international pressure.
The different organizations, the European Economic Community, the United States, individually Britain and the US, basically said that it was not time to lift sanctions completely. And I think that that is the accurate assessment of the situation. Mr. de Klerk has basically talked about reforming apartheid, but he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't even put into law the reforms that he said he's going to do.
The sanctions issue has been debated for years. In this story, South African Broadcasting admits they have hurt.
Sanctions have, over the past 4 years, left South Africans nearly $40 billion poorer, reduced the country's growth rate by at least 10%, and cut the number of available jobs by about 500,000.
I think it has, amongst the youth in particular, because we have 250,000 young work seekers coming to the market every year in South Africa. 80% of those people are black people, and you will understand the immense frustration of those people not having job opportunities and an ability to start their own careers for the future.
It should be noted that many of these sanctions were violated by Western countries. The latest issue, as this newsletter reports, is that South Africa continues to receive oil from nations in the Persian Gulf. South Africa Now has covered this story in the past.
It's been estimated that beating the oil embargo has cost Pretoria more than $2 billion annually. Attorney Robert Whitehall has written about the sources of South Africa's oil.
Saudi Arabia, Oman, United Emirates, Iran, and Brunei in the East Indies make up 86% of the South African oil supply.
Despite government efforts to avoid sanctions, anti-apartheid activists say that these restrictions have played a large role in bringing about reform. And now it is likely that as the South African government makes more concessions, sanctions will be lifted. This is Nadja Smith reporting for South Africa Now.
For the past couple of weeks, Joseph Diescho has been in Namibia, visiting family, friends, and observing how his country, barely a year old, is doing. He's back now, and here are some of his impressions.
In Namibia, the 1 year of independence is characterized by peace and the absence of strife all over the country. The SWAPO-led government's policy of national reconciliation continues to guide the government's words and deeds. The mood across the country shows one thing rather clearly. Reconciliation is both the government's strength and weakness. It is the price it has to pay for peace and stability in the short run, and not let Namibia become another Angola or Mozambique by not offending the powerful whites. It might also be the cause of instability in the long run, for it fails to satisfy the black majority who have to bear the brunt of colonialism, apartheid, and decades of abuse by the very whites whom the government has to assure that all is well for them as before. In a new democracy like Namibia, it would appear as though the legitimate Namibian government is damned if it effects serious changes to the ugly colonial past, and damned if it does not. This is so, in essence, because the evil of colonialism and apartheid cannot be reconciled with the good of democracy and justice. I'm Joseph Diescho for South Africa Now.
We have two reports this week in our Covering the Coverage segment. One on the New York Times Magazine cover story about Chief Gqubule. But the first, an update on the amount of network news coverage on South Africa. The Tyndall report, which monitors coverage, has some new information on TV reporting on South Africa. In the last 3 months of 1990, the South Africa story was at number 16 on Tyndall's list of the top 25 stories, a drop from the 8th position 3 months earlier. In December, South Africa ranked 26th of the top 30 stories. Also in our Covering the Coverage segment this week, we take a critical look at the cover story in the Sunday Times. The article by New York Times Johannesburg-based correspondent Christopher Wren offers a flattering profile of Chief Gqubule. South Africa Now's Emily Kasriel has a critique.
When a leader gets this type of treatment in a prestigious publication like the New York Times, it tends to influence the larger media agenda. While an informative look at Buthelezi or any South African figure is always welcome at a time when there is so little coverage of South African issues, this article seems to have its own, although not always obvious, agenda. Lies of Our Times is a magazine which monitors New York Times coverage. Bill Schaap is the editor.
Well, I think it's consistent with the New York Times position on South Africa, as most of Christopher Wren's writings clearly are, and that is essentially tilted towards the government of South Africa, particularly tilted against the ANC, and in this case, it suits him to be very pro-Buthelezi.
Schaap's critique seems as politically directed at Buthelezi as the Times, but a close look at what the article actually says and how it says it tells us as much about Christopher Wren's approach as the subject of his reporting. This is Chief Buthelezi. He heads what is now called the Inkatha Freedom Party, built largely on appeals to tribal loyalty, in this case, the Zulu cultural tradition. Buthelezi is also the Chief Minister of a homeland, KwaZulu, created by the white South African government as part of its apartheid program. Christopher Wren's article explains this. With colour photographs and pages of text, it portrays Buthelezi as a figure who is staking a claim for national leadership in a new South Africa. Wren portrays Buthelezi as a centrist, writing, "His friends like him for the very reasons his enemies at home and overseas hate him. His ideology sounds neither revolutionary nor romantic, but pragmatically middle of the road." This is classic Wren, implying, but never stating, that the African National Congress are the romantics and non-pragmatic revolutionaries. Ideological preferences disguised in journalese. Throughout the article, Wren reports Buthelezi's criticisms of ANC leaders, but never gives them a chance to respond. The full context is rarely provided. For example, would an anti-apartheid leader ally with these people, the all-white pro-apartheid Conservative Party? In his article, Christopher Wren says Buthelezi is exploring just such an alliance. For Wren, that makes him a pragmatist. Is this not a contradiction? Wren never explains. Although the article is broad in scope, it breaks no new ground, failing to investigate who is financing the Inkatha Party, Inkatha links with right-wing politicians and the police, Inkatha contacts with conservatives overseas. While Wren fails to detail links between Buthelezi and the South African state, another American journalist, Adam Hochschild, offers a perspective lacking in Wren's analysis.
When the ANC was banned, and when for being a member of the ANC, for being suspected of being a member of the ANC,
You could go to jail for many years, get severely tortured. During all this time, Buthelezi was free to organize his Inkatha movement, to maintain a paramilitary training camp, to address stadiums full of his followers, and that kind of support from the South African government very much continues today.
Wren also waffles in his discussions of tribalism. He implies that Chief Buthelezi is a leader of national stature, but makes constant reference to Butelezi's Zulu affiliations, even quoting Buthelezi. These people do not know Zulu history and forget that the warrior blood of kings and Zulu war generals courses in my veins. This contradiction is also never explained. We spoke with Christopher Wren, but he would not respond to our concerns by telephone. We are sending him a copy of this report to solicit his reaction. For South Africa Now, this is Emily Kasriel.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
As South African exiles prepare to return home, hundreds of new exiles are leaving their country. The government of Mozambique announced February 18th that 120 South Africans fleeing violence in Natal province are being relocated to Tanzania. There, they are likely to find housing in ANC-run settlements and education at the ANC school, Mckgwe, which is still catering to the needs of a growing number of new exiles. Here's a background report from a film the ANC has made. It's called We've Come a Long Way.
When the South African government introduced these reformist policies, you know, there could have been what you may have said, you know, was euphoria. You know, people thinking that, you know, in the immediate future, we'll all be flocking back home. But the exact opposite of that is taking place.
As a result of the Natal violence, which has today embraced the entire country, a new group of exiles arrives at the center each week. Can you tell me why you left the country? What were your reasons?
Well, the particular reason was the highest harassment by the police and the other white organization like Conservative Party. And also, after the banning of the organization, things have become very harder than before.
But it's, in the very same way, it's not easy to say when are we going home. And even the negotiations, as said, they might be so protracted that we can't really say tomorrow comrades will be going home. Nobody can really ascertain that we'll be going home in the near future. And besides, with the existing educational crisis at home, it necessitates that we also use the existing facilities here to impart those necessary skills that the comrades will need in the future South Africa.
The changing political situation at home is of great interest because we have to admit that changes are taking place. But as far as the educational aspect is concerned, we have to take into account that there are no facilities sufficient for black people at home. We cannot just now decide to close Mckgwe and go back home. We will be taking all these young people who are here to the streets.
Now with the unbanning, it was even Mandela. He gave a speech and told people to go back to school. But even still with that, people really didn't go to school. Just go there and sit in class and not much was happening. In fact, nothing was happening. So with that, I just saw that the education in the country at that moment wasn't really promising. So I found it necessary to leave.
Centimeters. Now, if I ask you a question, if we know that the focal length of the object lens is 5 centimeters, we want our lens to give
You
us
go home
a real magnifying
if you were
image.
given that opportunity?
But now?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
If I were to go back home now, frankly, I think I'd appear like a fool, you know, or somebody was just out on vacation. Because I would go back home empty-handed, and that's not my aim. And I still go back home to those schools that I was busy saying I'm getting away from, to that kind of system that I ran away from. You know, things haven't changed educationally. What the ANC is still doing is still fixing the politics of the country and the economics of the country. The educational
question hasn't yet been addressed. So if I go back now, what hope do I have? And another thing, time is running out. At least I know that when I go back home, even if things are not okay, but I'll be taking home something. Even my parents, at least they won't regret having let me go out of the country, because I'll be bringing back something, and they'll see it, okay, now these are the fruits of his going out.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
And in our culture segment, we take a look at how a radio station in Philadelphia is programming South African music on a weekly show that's getting a lively and popular response. South Africa Now visited WDAS-FM and sat in on the program with the show's host and creator.
Happy to be back with you for another week to feature the finest music from South Africa and talk with you a little bit about the cultural community and the very vital role that it plays in the mass democratic movement within South Africa.
The show is called Amandla, Music of South Africa, a weekly radio program on WDAS-FM in Philadelphia, hosted and created by James Iopolo.
I want to be able to present to people the most current news, the most current music. We just want them to really have a full understanding of what is happening today in today's South Africa.
To keep his listeners in touch with current affairs, Iopolo has enlisted the help of South African music journalist Sipho Jacobs, who phones in weekly reports from Johannesburg.
Hello, Sipho.
Hi, James.
Hey, Sabon. Sipho knows everybody in the music scene and knows virtually everybody in the cultural scene. So Sipho offers our listeners an opportunity to get a report from where it's all happening.
Well, to start with, James, the appointment of Professor Phil John to the as chief of the SABC
was hailed as a breakthrough by a lot of black organizations, in the sense that he was seen as the first person to try and
break the 42-year-old monopoly of the government being in control of the SABC.
I consider this program to be very important, in the sense that the American public has to know the truth and get the other side of the South African music that has never been given exposure, both locally and internationally.
Privatization of the SABC is only one of the many subjects Sipho has reported on. Others include returning exiles, the effects of the cultural boycott, and unrest in the townships. Iopolo has high aspirations for Radio Amandla and would like the program to go national, but he still remembers what he had to face in order to get the show on the air.
I ran into an incredible amount of conservatism, especially in public radio. They all thought the music was, what a great beat. Wow, this is really nice. This reminds me of Graceland. But as soon as I tried to explain to people the significance of the music, its relevance, why a song is about what it's about, it was, we don't want to be too political. We cannot mention the ANC. We don't want to sound political. We know apartheid is bad, but let's just stick to the beat. Let's just stick to the music.
For almost a year, Radio Amandla has been a regular weekly broadcast on WDAS-FM. The radio station is pleased with the public's response to the program. Station manager Kenny Anderson.
We're not a public radio station, we're a commercial radio station. But it's important to us to be more than just music. And this program combines music and information. The listener response to this program has been outstanding.
So we're developing this nice little network of people that want to hear the information and they want to hear the music. Now you can open up a newspaper anywhere in the United States and be lucky if you find 3 lines about South Africa.
With the recent changes towards building a new South Africa, some feel that the anti-apartheid movement is no longer necessary. However, Iopolo disagrees and intends to continue his show.
This is what I know best. Radio is what I know best. So for me,
this is my contribution to the struggle. And whether it's important or not, the feedback I get from listeners tell me that it is, and I'm happy with that.
As always, we thank you for listening, and to Godfrey and Sibongile, Giti Giabonga, Bafundi Sibami. For Amandla Music of South Africa, I'm James Diabolo. Take care.
That's our program for this week. Special thanks to Island Trading Company for becoming one of our underwriters and helping us with our financial crisis. South Africa Now would like your views on our show and on the job we're doing. We want to hear your opinions on the stories we report. In the weeks ahead, we'll read some of them at the end of each broadcast. Send your comments to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund, a tax-exempt organization providing assistance and relief to victims of apartheid. We leave you now with more scenes from schools for South African exiles in Tanzania. On behalf of everyone on South Africa Now, I'm Fana D. Kekana. See you next week.
Mandela in America. The new 90-minute video can be ordered from South Africa Now for $25, which includes postage and handling. Write to South Africa Now, Post Office Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. A portion of the proceeds will help fund South Africa Now. South Africa Now is also supported by public television viewers like you. Transcripts of this program are available for $4. South Africa Now is also available now on video cassette for just $29.95. To order transcripts or cassettes, or for more information, write to South Africa Now, care of Journal Graphics Incorporated, 267 Broadway,